Welcome back, deckheads, to Cast A Commotion, the podcast hosted by Crash Command Games. This is where we talk about Flesh and Blood. We're on to episode 4 here. We're going through the breakdown of the sets, my experiences with them, the mechanics introduced in each set, and we're extrapolating upon those initial thoughts on Flesh and Blood. We're getting into the intermediate level, right? We're talking a little bit more about what the mechanics do, where to see them, what to do with them. I'm going to talk about times that I have seen them in either great effect or poor effect. And then I just talk about some of the powerhouse cards from the set, things to be looking out for. This time from Arcane Rising on Cast A Commotion. Alright, this time we're on to Arc, the second set of Flesh and Blood. It was not much of a bigger set, but expanded onto the game with 4 heroes. Arcane Rising became legal in 2020, actually. 2020 is when it was printed out. I know that because I just received a Stormstriders that said copyright 2021, my first counterfeit card. Something we'll discuss later in other episodes. But do know Arcane was printed in 2020. Same resources, power, defense value, life, and elect. Nothing too crazy got introduced to the game during Arcane, except for arcane damage. Obviously, this is where this gets introduced. Arcane damage is a new form of damage that is, it's dealt usually by spellcasters, the rune blades, and all that. The only way to describe it is, if you ever watched the Harry Potter movies and you saw the fight between Dumbledore and Voldemort, when Voldemort's zapping off little bits to the side, right? That's how rune blades attack. There's a primary attack, but there's always going to be these little jolts of damage shooting off to the side, just tapping at you. That's a really awful way, if you haven't seen those movies, to talk about it, but it's just how rune blades work. And then there's obviously introduced in this set the big boy himself, Kano, who's just a wizard, the first of his kind in Flesh and Blood. All kinds of exciting stuff happened through arcane damage. We can talk about that a bit more as we get into it. We started to see the ability to reveal cards and look into the future a bit. This was a bit more of a mystical set, as given by the name. You could look at the top through cards that said reveal the top or the new ability opt, right? And we'll go over that later as well. Instants became a lot more prevalent in this set. We started to learn a lot more about instant speed, interactions, priorities, and the game got really advanced with this set from what it had been. So, what else? God, this set was huge. The first couple sets are just massive on their introductions, which is why I'm breaking them down into their own episodes. One we could talk about is, we'll just start with the keywords that come into this set. Obviously, we still have Dominate and all this other stuff that we learned about in the previous sets, but in this one, a good one to look at is Arcane Barrier. Arcane Barrier is probably the best way to deal with combat with arcane folk. If you would be dealt arcane damage, you can pay a resource instead to prevent some of that arcane damage, depending on the level of Arcane Barrier you have. We'll just use like Null Rune Robe, right? It's just a robe you can put on. It's one of your equipment. It's now available to you in your inventory as of this set. It's a chest piece, right? It takes place of some of your armor, but it says Arcane Barrier 1. If your hero would be dealt arcane damage, you may pay a single resource instead. If you do prevent 1 arcane damage, that source would deal. Now, coming from many other card games, you might expect this to be like a layered trigger or activated ability or something like that. It is not. It's a replacement effect. And in this game, it means there's no priority during this window. It's just when you are dealt that damage, you may prevent it by paying resources. You can have multiple instances of this, right? So you could have the Null Rune hood, the cloak, the gloves, the boots, all Null Rune, or anything that says Arcane Barrier on it. You can have a ton of that stacked up. Arcane Barrier can be used every time you would be dealt arcane damage. It's not a once per turn effect. You notice you don't see that phrasing in that ability of Arcane Barrier. Each instance of Arcane Barrier you control can be used one time. Each time a source would deal arcane damage to you. All right? That is the important part to note. Each instance of Arcane Barrier, that means each of those Null Rune things have Arcane Barrier 1. That's an instance. Can be used only one time. Each time a source would deal damage to you. So if you have 4 different things dealing 1 arcane damage to you, and it's coming up later, then you could use your Arcane Barrier 1 time on each of those 4 sources and prevent all the damage. Alternatively, if you have one source dealing 3 arcane damage, and you have Arcane Barrier 1, Arcane Barrier 1, Arcane Barrier 1, right? 3 pieces of Null Rune. You could then apply 3 instances of Arcane Barrier 1 to that one source of damage and pay 3 resources to prevent it. It's not a great way to go about that. It's just something you're going to get used to in this game. There's no layering mechanic, no triggered mechanic that works with this. It just happens. But yeah, to fully prevent 3 arcane damage, you would need 3 total Arcane Barrier. Whether that be in 1 piece of equipment or 3. Doesn't matter. You just need 3 total instances or 3 capable Arcane Barrier. Equipment that use Arcane Barrier, unlike other equipment that block, they do not move to the combat chain, right? Because most things that deal arcane damage are not on the combat chain themselves, though there are some exceptions, but they are mostly just an effect that is on the layer and resolves and deals you the arcane damage. So most of the time, you're not actually blocking with the Null Rune or Arcane Barrier equipment. You can prevent arcane damage you've dealt to yourself. Doesn't care where the damage came from. It just says prevent arcane damage being dealt to you. It doesn't care about the source or the controller. Players cannot respond to the prevention. Like I said earlier, it's when you're being dealt. This is a pretty hard concept, I assume, for Magic the Gathering players in specific, especially the ones who are around when damage stacked, right? It's just when the damage is happening, you can immediately put cards into your pitch zone to pay costs to prevent the damage. It's just a trade. It's an automatic trade, no layer. You can't respond to it. It is a replacement. It's not an activated or a triggered ability. What else can you really say about it? Preventing arcane damage doesn't destroy the equipment. There are some instances where that may happen in the future, or there's other equipment that's like this that does an effect like this that gets destroyed, but if it says Arcane Barrier, and you're using Arcane Barrier, as of right now, it is not destroyed. that is a huge piece of the Arcane Rising equation, is just getting used to arcane damage. I can't tell you how many judges got this wrong. Calling skirmishes, anything I played in, the wife would be playing a hero that specifically uses arcane damage in multiple little ticks, just 1, 1, 1, 1. And I had multiple high level judges tell us that a piece of equipment with Arcane Barrier 3 could be used to cover 3 total damage, right? So there were 3 stacks of 1 damage, and this judge said that this Arcane Barrier 3, which is 1 instance, could be applied to all 3 of them. I could see how that's confusing, right? It says the number 3 on it. It says prevent 3 arcane damage with this ability. But those words I said earlier can be applied each time to 1 instance. That means that Arcane Barrier 3 is actually being applied to one of those little ticks. One of those little 1 damage ticks. You're preventing 3 arcane damage from that one source for 3 resources. You then have to do it again for the next one and the next one, right? It gets pretty expensive. That's where you're going to find your value and the challenge of, well, which number of Arcane Barrier do I bring? Do I bring the heavy one? Do I bring the light one? Et cetera, et cetera. That's probably the most irritating example I've had of Arcane Barrier being misunderstood by a judge. But like I said, that's just something it's going to take a lot of time to adjust to for new players. If you're jumping in late into the game, like most of you probably are if you're listening to this podcast and are new, this will be a more natural process. But be aware, arcane damage is different than normal damage. We'll move on for now. We've been talking about that for way too long. Like I said earlier, Opt was introduced into this set. It's a keyword on some cards that on a resolution, you can look at however many cards it says to opt for. So opt 1, opt 2, opt 3, you can look at that many cards of the top of your deck and you can put them on the top or the bottom in any order. The most famous example of this that I can think of is going to be Whispers of the Oracle. A non-attack action says opt 4. That means you're going to look at the top 4 cards of your deck, and you can put them on the top and the bottom in any order. It doesn't matter what. Pretty powerful. Lets you kind of get a peek at what's coming, plan defenses, or attacks. Again, things got weird in this set. The number of cards you place on the top and the bottom can't really be hidden from your opponent. Like, they're going to know if you put 1, 2, or 3 cards on the top or the bottom. That's just, you just have to, it's public information. And you may put all of the cards on the top or the bottom or any combination of the two. Just pretty simple ability comparatively to the Arcane Barrier. The next mechanic in this set was introduced by the Mechanologist, Dash, Inventor Extraordinaire. We'll talk more about her later, but the mechanic that's being introduced is called Boost. It's a Mechanologist mechanic that allows an attack action card to gain Go Again. As stated here, it only affects attack action cards, and it can give them Go Again. The example given is Throttle, right? Just a basic attack action, attacks for 6, and it has Boost, which says, as an additional cost to play Throttle, you may banish the top card of your deck. If it's a Mechanologist card, Throttle gains Go Again. So off of that, you know, anytime something says Boost, all it's saying is, as an additional cost to play this card, you can banish the top card of your deck. If it's a mech card, it gains Go Again. That's it. Naming's not important, whatever. It's an additional cost, so it has to be paid at the same time you pay your resources or whatever other costs as well. So you have to choose right then and there when you're playing the card, before it's an attack, whether or not you're going to boost. You can only boost one time per card, right? Like, that's a weird way to say that. I guess the only way to say it is you can't pay the boost cost on one card multiple times, right? So, like, you couldn't say, oh, I'm going to boost 5 times, because the card says, as an additional cost to play Throttle, you may banish the top card of your deck, right? It's not quite as open as that phrasing makes it. It's a one-time additional cost if you choose, right? Whether or not you hit a Mechanologist card is irrelevant. You are considered to have boosted, which becomes relevant with other Mechanologist cards. So, recovering it again, additional cost, you can only pay it once, you're considered to have boosted, and if you reveal a Mechanologist card off the top of your deck, that attack action gains Go Again. Next up is Reload. Reload is a ranger mechanic that basically lets you put a card from your hand face down into your arsenal as a resolution of that card. The example is Take Aim. It's the next ranger attack action card you play this turn gains +3. And it then says Reload. So the way that reads out is, if you have no cards in your arsenal, so your arsenal has to be empty or you have to have an additional arsenal, you may put a card from your hand face down into your arsenal. Go Again, right? You can choose to put no cards from your hand in there, but your arsenal must be empty in order for you to use the reload mechanic. That is the most simple of the mechanics introduced, I swear. Like, it's super easy. The only other thing that got introduced this set that was super special is the Rune Chant token. It's an aura. It says auras stay in the arena until they're destroyed, or whatever, right? When you play an attack action card, or attack with a weapon. So irritatingly enough, that's already kind of a small complexity. To attack with a weapon, the weapon has to hit the combat chain. Doesn't sound super relevant, but like, if you declare you're attacking, and for some reason that weapon never hits the combat chain, you haven't attacked with that weapon. So the Rune Chant won't see that. But when you play an attack action card, the Rune Chant sees that immediately before it becomes an attack. So there's different timings that trigger the Rune Chant token. Just note that. So let's start from the top. When you play an attack action card or attack with a weapon, destroy the Rune Chant and deal 1 arcane damage to target opposing hero. Only because I know that something's coming down the pipe later on in this game do I want to mention. The Rune Chant doesn't care if it's still there as of the resolution of this ability. The Rune Chant just says, destroy Runechant, and deal 1 arcane damage. Both of those effects will happen. Whether or not both of those effects have a legal target is another matter. So, if for some reason the Runechant disappears, but that ability is still on the layer, it's going to resolve and that 1 arcane damage is still going to happen to an opposing hero. We will cover that much later. Notes about the Runechant. Each Runechant is its own source of arcane damage. So if you have 1 Runechant, that's 1 arcane damage. If you have 10 Runechants, yes, you are threatening 10 arcane damage, but it is 1 arcane damage 10 times. There are all different sources. So a single instance of Arcane Barrier, 1, could be used to prevent all of that damage. Because each source is only dealing 1, and it's Arcane Barrier 1, so you could, apply it to each of those. The Runechant Aura token remains in play until destroyed. When you attack, you must destroy the Runechants. You can't save them up. That's not an optional effect. It just says, there's a lot of things in this game you're going to learn are forced triggers. The first one you're going to have run into would have been from Welcome to Wraith, the Quicken token. You can't save it up. It's once you crack it or meet its condition, it's going to happen. So no saving up Quicken tokens, no saving up Runechants, and many other things like this. Because there are going to be a bunch of douchebags who try to tell you, you're not allowed to represent things on the table. It's technically note-taking. Tell them to eat your ass. like for the moral good and just in general. Dice and all that should be allowed in most games. If you want to note how many Runechants you have on a piece of paper, that's fine. It's public information. It's on your opponent to also track this information, right? Don't let someone shark you out of that. It's been a hot button topic for me lately. I get mad when people say, you're not allowed to note. Like, yeah, I get that advanced note taking might not be enabled, but if we're counting something on the table, fucking deal with it. Just make sure everybody knows what it is. If you control multiple auras, you may represent dice to represent that, is what I'm going to say. Just do it. You got a few people out there that will say no, but and you know what? I was almost one of those people until I kind of realized that wasn't healthy for the game. That is it. That is all the crazy new stuff introduced into Arcane Rising, right? Runechants, reload, boosting, opt, and Arcane Barrier. Thankfully, the load was pretty light on learning because there was one really complicated thing, and that was the barrier, obviously. We could just go over like card-specific things like the heroes and weapons, right? We'll just keep going down that list. Azalea the Ranger was put out in this list. Rumor has it all over the internet and all over the legends of every local game store. She was not supposed to be in this set. And as of time of recording, we now know what set she was supposed to be in. And it shows, right? All she did by appearing in this set was balance out the draft experience and made for a horrific constructed experience if you were playing her prior to Outsiders. But that's neither here or there. We're going to talk about Azalea. She's a ranger. No talents yet. We're not in that phase yet. And she has an ability that says, once per turn action. 0 cost. Put a card from your arsenal on the bottom of your deck. If you do, put the top card of your deck face up into your arsenal. If it's an arrow card, it gains Dominate until the end of turn. Go again. So, parsing that out, you have to have a card in your arsenal to gain the second part of the effect. You can technically activate her effect, it just won't do anything. I guess it'll break the combat chain or do some other weird stuff, but yeah, if you want to do the rip a card off the top and put it into the arsenal and check to see if it gains Dominate, you have to have a card in your arsenal. If you have no cards in your deck when you activate the ability, you will just place the card you placed on the bottom back into the arsenal face up. So you can cycle the arrow in your arsenal at the end of the game for a sick dominated flourish, right? If you have no cards in your deck and you activate that, because of the way that the ability is worded, you put the card on the bottom of your deck and then you reveal the top of your deck. Right? So that's something to note. She has a sweet finisher mechanic. And then you can activate this with no cards in arsenal. And that's really it for Azalea. From that, you can, much like Bravo, get the understanding that you're looking to apply huge on-hit effects and dominate arrows out. Kind of like he's looking to dominate spinal crushes and things like that. She'll be looking to dominate some of her more devastating arrows and pin you against the wall and just play with you the entire time. It sucks. I mean, I just played my first game against an Azalea, and no disrespect, but no, we're not doing that. But she gets rough later in Outsiders. She gets very hard to play against later on. But at the time that this was released, just for the draft experience. The next hero up is Dash, the mechanologist I alluded to earlier. One of the weirder abilities you're going to start with. It says, you may start the game with a mechanologist item of 2 resource cost or less in the arena. It's considered to have entered the arena. So basically at the start of the game, right before you draw up, you fetch that card out. How would I say this happens? So the item has to be chosen before you present your deck for the cut. All right? You don't get to peek at your deck after that. The card is in your deck, right? So it's considered part of the deck for when your deck checked or something. It starts as though it entered the arena, even though it can't have had that effect trigger technically. It's just considered to have done so. You can also elect not to put an item into play. From that, you can divine that Dash is going to be trying to put some items into play to kind of build up a little bit of a board state. She's one of the first heroes that does this. And at the time, she would put all these little trinkets and little batteries and weird pieces of equipment into play, and she'd become unstoppable. She'd be getting free turns left and right. She could block with her full hand and still be returning massive damage. It was just a nightmare. Very fun hero to watch. I haven't played her, so I don't really know how it works that well or how Dash is looking. I know she just won a calling recently. So even though an older hero, very much so doing well, and a good one to check out. The next hero is probably the more exciting hero in the set, Kano. Kano's a wizard, Drukai of Aether. The biggest thing you're going to notice right up front is, I haven't said this for any other hero, except for the first episode when I was doing it. Azalea has intellect 4, health 20 young, 40 old. Dash, intellect 4, health 20, 40 adult. Right? Kano has 4 intellect, but has 15 health when he's young and 30 health as an adult. That is a third of your life gone at the start of the game, and there's a reason for that. Kano trades off a quarter. That's just disappointing. That's just... a quarter of your life is already gone when you start the game with Kano. And here's why. Kano has the ability to, as an instant, okay, which means anytime the Kano player has priority, they may activate this ability. For 3 resources, Kano can look at the top card of your deck. If it's a non-attack action card, you may banish it. If you do, you may play it this turn as though it were an instant. Things to note here. Because that's a lot to take in for anybody just jumping into the game. If the card has Go Again, you gain an action point when the card resolves on your turn only. You can't gain action points on an opponent's turn. So what that says is if you have no action points left, if that red light is on that we've been talking about, and you have no action points, but you use Kano's ability and the card that resolves at instant speed, because instants don't need action points, so you can play it. But if that card is Go Again, you get your action point back. You now have an action. So that's something crazy. But yeah, you don't get action points on an opponent's turn. So you can activate this on an opponent's turn and resolve things, but you just won't get the action point. The card is banished faced up. That's mostly to prove that it's a non-attack action card. You do not have to play the card immediately. You can play it any time during the turn you banished it, as long as you have priority. And the card remains in the banish zone face up, even if it's not played, right? It's just known information. That all sounds really simple, and there's not an easy way for me to break that down, but learning when you gain priority and learning when you give up priority to your Kano opponent is going to be what wins and loses you games. The last hero of Arcane Rising that was introduced is Viserai. This is the hero that I decided to play for the set, and Viserai is the Rune Blade. Another static ability, one that you don't have to activate, but a very important one. Viserai says, when you play a Rune Blade card, if you have played another non-attack action card this turn, create a rune chant token. Very important to note, Viscerai's hero is not once per turn, which means every time after you've played a non-attack action card, if you play a Runeblade card, you're creating rune chants. You can create multiple rune chants in a single turn. I've done it. I could do it right now, but I'm not gonna. The non-attack action card does not have to be a Runeblade card. It just has to be a non-attack action card. The following are counted as Runeblade cards. Everything. Everything, basically. If it has that word Runeblade on it, you're creating rune chants, baby. You're going off the fucking... Oh, god damn! Nothing feels better than creating 9 rune chants and then getting off the sacred birthday cake. You don't know what that means yet if you're brand new, but it hurts real bad when it happens to you. So, to recap, whenever you play a Runeblade card, if you've played a non-attack, create rune chants. End of story. That's all Viscerai does. Seems really simple, but it gets really oppressive, and it accelerates his damage curve through the roof. I guess, like the other episode, we'll go through the weapons as well. We'll start alphabetically with Crucible of Aetherweave. That is Kano's weapon. Not like specific... Well, it is actually his signature, but also, it's a wizard weapon, and it's a staff. It's a 2-handed staff, and it says once per turn instant. So, Kano again with the instants. Anytime Kano has priority, able to use this if using it. For 1 resource, the next card you play this turn with an effect that deals arcane damage instead deals that much arcane damage plus 1. Has no power, doesn't have any attacks, you can't attack with it. And if the next card you play does not have an effect that deals arcane, it will not count. And the next card with an effect that deals arcane will be affected still. You have to activate this before playing the card, though. That's the only caveat. You can't, like, sneak it in there as, like, a, haha, now it's actually this much. Nope, you have to do it before. Next up is, in my opinion, even this late into the game, and I say late into the game, but this far into the game, years after Arcane Rising's release, I believe the Death Dealer is the best bow. Period. It's a 2-handed ranger weapon. It's Azalea's signature weapon. And it says once per turn action, if you have no cards in your arsenal, for 1 resource, you can put an arrow card from your hand face up into your arsenal. If you do, draw a card. Go again. So if you don't have any cards in your arsenal, you put an arrow card into your arsenal face up. The draw card is just so good. You get to cycle cards out of your hand, find different answers, and then you can always just get rid of the arrow if it's not that important with Azalea's ability. This is the only reason Azalea could even fight back. If the bow were a little bit worse, I don't think anyone would have liked her. But this bow had so much potential from the get-go, people knew something was going to come out, and it was just going to set this weapon off. This doesn't have a power, so you can't attack with the weapon. It just enables you to kind of use your arsenal to fire off arrows. You may use this ability even when you have cards in your arsenal, but if you don't put an arrow card from your hand, you don't draw a card. Right? The clause, if you do draw a card, you have to put the arrow in there. Arrow cards are just subtype of attack actions that say arrow on the bottom middle of the card. They'll be identified pretty clearly. It'll say like ranger attack action arrow or something like that. An arrow can be played from the arsenal even if it wasn't a bow that placed it in the arsenal. Doesn't matter how it gets there. The arrow just has to be in the arsenal when it fires off. It doesn't give the arrow go again. It's just that the action of using the Death Dealer has go again. Azalea, the Death Dealer, and all Rangers have a very unique playstyle where they kind of have to knock the arrow, set the trap. Huge setup, lots of room for error, but huge rewards if you get it going. The Runeblade weapon, Viscerai's weapon of choice, is the Nebula Blade. A Runeblade weapon, it's a sword, a 2-hander, that has once per turn action. For 2 resources, you can attack. It only has a power of 1, so 2 resources for 1 attack feels really bad. And it says if the Nebula Blade hits, create a rune chant token. Right, so that's just more of Viscerai's whole thing. Is every time I move, I'm creating a rune chant token. So if this hits, create a rune chant. It also has a second ability of if you have played a non-attack action card this turn, the Nebula Blade. Jesus Christ, I suck at saying. The Nebula Blade gains +3 power until end of turn. Really simple weapon. Most of Viscerai's mechanics are really simple. You just have to keep track of all of them. And he does create a lot of them. Nebula Blade can only get the power bonus once per turn. Right? It just checks to see if you have played a non-attack, and if you do, it gets +3. It's not every time you play a non-attack. If you played a non-attack action card after you've attacked with a Nebula Blade, but before it does damage, it still gets the power bonus. It's like that Anothos thing that I was talking about, where it's always checking for it. It doesn't care when it happens. It just happens. How do you play a non-attack action as an instant? Well, Kano can do it. Viscera can with certain cards. Certain equipment, certain armor. Other cards themselves have it printed. If you meet some conditions, it can be played as an instant. The game starts to get pretty tricky in Arcane Rising. And then the last weapon we'd go over is the Teklo Plasma Pistol. It is a mechanologist weapon. It's somehow a two-handed pistol. The thing has to be absolutely massive. I'm not sure why it's a two-handed pistol. They could have just... I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like that it's a two-handed pistol, but Dash is already doing well enough and doesn't seem to need any help, so we're just going to move on. Its first action is remove a steam counter from the Teklo Plasma Pistol. Attack. It has a power of 2. So it doesn't cost any resources, but you have to remove a steam counter from it. How do you get a steam counter? The second action is action, 1 resource. If there are no steam counters on the Teklo Plasma Pistol, put a steam counter on it. Go again. Why do you have to do all of this just to load a pistol and then fire it? Because it closes combat chains, it gives priority, it does a couple things. Makes you go through a whole process to get her going properly. Gives you different windows to do different tricks. Mechanologist and Ranger have a lot of setup and a lot of ability. You have to pay a lot of attention when you're playing either of those classes. You can use that second ability even if it already has a steam counter on it. It just doesn't put a second one on it because it does say if there are no steam counters on it. You can attack with the weapon more than once per turn, provided you have the action points. Notice this is one of the only weapons, right? The Nebula Blade says once per turn action, 2 resources attack. The Death Dealer says once per turn action, right? But the Teklo Plasma Pistol does not. It just says action. Remove a steam counter. Attack. Doesn't care how you get there. You just have to be able to get there, and you can attack with it as many times as you want. Something that Dash loves to do. There are a few cards I hear that are pretty good from Arcane Rising. I'm going to give a polarizing statement on one of them. Art of War is a crutch. This card is a drug. It is a huge dope fucking hit straight to the head. I can't describe how much I do not like this card. Playing for that top 4 slot, playing for the games. End of the game is coming up. My opponent can only present a few blocks, and I know that. I know that for a fact because they're despairing about it. I try to pop off with my Art of War in my arsenal. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about what Art of War does. Art of War is an instant, a generic instant, which makes it fantastic. Every deck can use this card, and everybody seems to think you need to. Pitch 2, so it's a yellow card. It pitches for 2, and it costs 1, right? So it's an instant that costs 1 resource to play. But then it has the ability of choose 2. Attack action cards you control get +1 power and +1 defense for the turn. The next attack action card you play this turn has Go Again. Gains Go Again. Until end of turn, you may defend with an attack action card from your arsenal. You may banish an attack action card from your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. So you're paying 1 resource and playing Art of War out of your hand to have a very flexible card. It gives all of your attack actions +1, and if you're swinging with a lot of them, that stacks up to be 4 to 5 extra free damage a turn. The next attack action card you control gets Go Again. This applies to any attack action card you play. All of the heavy hitters of this game can be used with this. Until end of turn, you may defend with attack action cards from your arsenal. That's rule breaking, right? Normally you can't defend with attack actions from your arsenal, but this lets you, right? So it's also a defensive option. You may banish an attack action card from your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. All of this sounds so fantastic. So good. Things to note that the famous Matt Rogers found out at this last calling was you have to choose the modes as you play Art of War, right? Banishing the card is not a part of the cost, etc., etc. They were tired, right? Like I said in the first few episodes, give people the goddamn benefit of the doubt. I am blown away I didn't make more mistakes at one of my bigger appearances because I didn't sleep the previous night. And I was absolutely zombified. I was dragging a caffeine-fueled husk through that tournament for for 8 hours, and then I had to go into a no time limit top 8, and I was playing Oldhim, and then I had to go into a no time limit top 4, and then I had to play a no time limit final, right? People get tired, mistakes are going to happen. So if you've read about the Matt Rogers thing and you're mad about him and the Art of War thing, don't be. Give people the benefit of the doubt first. Moving along, you must choose the modes as you play Art of War. You cannot choose the same mode more than once. You must choose 2 modes. Defending with an attack action card from the arsenal still follows the normal timing restrictions. You have to defend with the card during the defending window, right? So when the opponent blocks, before you pass to reactions, you have to block with a card from your arsenal if you're going to choose that mode. Cards without an attack or defensive value cannot gain attack or defense. So you can't give a card with no defense, +1 defense, and block with it to save your life. You just can't. Even if a card has an attack value of 0, that's an attack value. So it will get the +1, just to note, for later cards in the game. As long as the card has that symbol, the attack symbol, the spear, or the shield symbol, the armor, it can gain these properties. Back to why I hate Art of War. You play Art of War, you choose your modes. I go +1 power, because I'm going to go wide this turn. I just know it. I know it for sure. I then choose to banish an attack action card from my hand and draw 2 cards, because I'm going to draw those perfect attacks. I'm definitely not going to draw 2 more Art of Wars with no other attack action in my hand. That's definitely never going to happen. So the point of this story is, Art of War, while yes, it does open up huge possibilities, on average turns an average turn up by like 2 points, which can be huge, I guess. It can turn that turn into a +6 or 7. Right? It has a huge cap on what it can do for you. It can really pop your games off. It can guarantee you a win early. Or it can cost you your game in your top 8. Because it is one of the few cards that introduce another random variable into your game. Most of the time when you're playing this, you have a 4-card hand. You're trading 1 card to pitch and 1 card to play. And then you're banishing a card. So you're trading 3 cards for 2 cards. Yes, that's filtering. Yes, that has potential and possibility. Both ways. It has potential and possibility for both ways. Please explore every option you have in deck building. And we will talk about this later. I will talk about my deck building procedure. I will talk about other people's deck building procedure. I'll take little interviews here and there later in the future. Just don't fall in love with this card immediately because of the possibilities. Remember that this game is so popular and has exploded so hard because of its ability to control the game. You control what you do. As soon as you give in to Art of War, you become a slave. I work in a casino, and I've seen the exact look on someone's face when they hit a sick Art of War on someone who's hit a minor win on a slot machine. I have seen the same look out of a person who lost all of their money that I've seen on somebody drawing a bad Art of War hand. It's a really weak and weird comparison. I don't know what else to tell you. It is a gambler's card. I hate it. It's not won me enough games to be convincing to me. I have seen the highs, I have seen the lows, and I initially was going to take it out of my Phi deck, and I brought it down to 2. That was my compromise. I didn't take all 3 out of the deck, but I took 1 out of the deck because I never wanted to see a draw 2 Art of Wars again. So, remember, all of the cards in this game are tools. Very few of them would I consider 100% auto includes. From the generic pool, is what I'm saying. From the generic pool. Other notable cards. I believe this card is sick. It's called Chains of Eminence. It's a red card. It costs 0. It's a generic aura. Has go again, which is important. It says the word go again, so you can just do this and go again. When Chains of Eminence enters the arena, name a card. The named card can't be pitched, played, or used to defend while Chains of Eminence is in the arena. At the beginning of your action phase, destroy Chains of Eminence. Has 2 defense, no power. You name the card when the ability resolves. The player can respond to Chains of Eminence being played, but not after the card has been named. You may still put the named card in your arsenal or reveal it to pay additional costs. You just can't pitch it, play it, or defend with it. Or stay in the arena until they're destroyed. I had so much fun as a Dorinthia player with Chain in the format, just naming Seeds of Agony. If you don't know what any of that means, Chain required 9 Seeds of Agony in that deck. You would not play with less than 9. The card got banned. It was too good. It was a free card, gave you some arcane damage. It had a good block. It pitched well. Not if this was here. I can't tell you how many games I stole just by playing this card. That may not always present itself, but if you ever notice a meta getting a little too irritating in your area, it's a card you could try out. It's cheap. Nobody likes it, but I love it. The next powerhouse card from Arcane Rising is the absolutely famous Command and Conquer. Infamous, even. Reviled for what it does to you, but famous. It is an attack action card. It's a generic one. It is a red card, pitches for 1, costs 2. It has the very powerful effect of saying defense reactions can't be played to Command and Conquer's Chain Link. So, a few things there. It says can't be played. Defense reactions can be activated against Command and Conquer's Chain Link for all you Oldham players out there. Anything that says a defense reaction is an activation can, but if you're playing a card, you can't, right? A card cannot be played if it's a defense reaction to Command and Conquer's Chain Link. The second part of the card is if Command and Conquer hits a hero. That's key. You can't hit an ally, a dragon, an illusion. You can't hit any of that shit. You have to hit the hero. If Command and Conquer hits a hero, destroy all cards in their arsenal. So there are a few ways that some people can get multiple cards in an arsenal. This destroys all of them, not just one, right? It's power 6, defense 3. It's very hard to defend properly against this card without just giving up your turn. It's amazing. Earlier I said there's no auto includes. This is, I think, as close as it gets. I think Enlightened Strike is like the perfect Majestic from Welcome to Wraith earlier because it has a lot of flexibility and it can go in every deck, but it's up to your style and preference because it's not so good that it has to. I think Command and Conquer is a little overtuned. It's very good. Not every deck uses it, but you should consider having a set in your collection for sure. I'll mention it. It's the Eye of Ophidia. When you pitch it, because it can only be pitched, it's a gem. You can't play it. You can't defend with a card. You have to pay a cost to pitch the card, and it's a legendary card, so you can only have one in your deck. But it says when you pitch it, opt to. That's insanely good. Enough said. It's a fabled gem. If you can get a hold of it, fantastic. If not, it's not that big of a deal. Notable tiny cards that I think will become relevant as time goes on. Lead the Charge. It's a generic action that costs 0, and it comes in the rainbow of colors, red, blue, and yellow. The next time you play an action card with cost 0, 1, or 2, depending on the pitch value, gain an action point. It doesn't give a go again. It gets around things that shut off go again. It just gives you the action point. If the action has go again, you'll end up with 2 action points once that card resolves. An action point allows you to play action cards, right? So that's a huge, huge boon. And then lead the Charge looks at the base cost of the action card, so modifiers don't affect it. So it gets through a lot. I think it's an amazing card. You should definitely have some. They're commons. There's no reason not to pick them up. They're cheap, easy, and will help you a lot. Things to note: Plunder Run, one of the most fantastic cards from Arcane Rising. If you're trying to follow along or going through like a card list while listening or looking for things, Plunder Run is banned in Classic Constructed. I don't think anything else from this set was banned. Are there any other sleepers I can think about? Not a whole lot. I didn't talk about legendary equipment in the last one, so I won't in this one. It's just obvious that legendary equipment for your set or for your hero are going to be good. Notably, a few locals of mine and I who watch things closely and try to compare cards here and there We believe you need to pick up a pair of Stormstriders whenever you can. This is not like a market thing. This is not they're so cheap right now. No, they're so good. They're so good. If at any time you even have an inkling that you're going to play a wizard, just pick them up. It doesn't matter. Just pick them up. We can't figure a way to power creep them without like breaking the game. Like, obviously, maybe the people at LSS who do this for a living and playtest, right? They might figure out a way, but for now, I just can't see a way around Stormstriders being. They're so good. Let me tell you what they do. Stormstriders are the wizard equipment legs. They're the legendary of the set. They have the ability of instant, 1 resource, destroy the Stormstriders. That's the cost. You pay a red resource and you destroy the Stormstriders. The ability is, you may play your next wizard non-attack action card this turn as though it were an instant. Just no matter what, you just have an instant card in your hand at all times if you have this on the table and you're always threatening it. On top of that, it has Arcane Barrier 2. So it's just better than all of the Null Rune gear on top of that. It has a defense value, so if you are forced to block with something like for a future card called T-Bone that forces you to block with equipment, you can just throw these in front of it. It's so good. You can have multiple instances of Arcane Barrier. You must pay the 2 resources to prevent arcane damage, even if you're only preventing 1, right? So that's the downside, is it's Arcane Barrier 2. When cards are destroyed, they're sent to the graveyard. That's all I would note about this. You're just going to have to play around with a lot of the neat cards that do arcane damage to really get used to Arcane Barrier. But yeah, that's Arcane Rising. This was one of the most fun sets for me. I found Viscerai to be a really good moving on point from Dorinthia. Still similar that I was relying on my weapon back in the day. I was relying on the Nebula Blade quite a bit and trying to work around my weapon. But at the same time, I was attacking for less and not building up a board position, but I was instead tapping in arcane damage sneakily, and it was very fun and oppressive at the time, honestly. I really can't get over how much of an effect this set has on the game. Art of Wars, Command and Conquers, all of the legendaries are just as used today as they were when the set released. The heroes are all relevant now. As much as I love Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising heroes are actually relevant in most of the formats. Kano's a bit rougher, but a good Kano almost always makes it to day 2 on big events. Definitely a fun set worth checking out. I don't think you're going to be able to get draft for long for this. Unlimited stopped print last year in 2022. If you can get a hold of it and you really want to feel the draft experience, do so. It was sick. I am personally going to make sure I get a draft of this with my local community as soon as I can get one together. I'm giving away a box of Arcane Rising as the prize to my league that I started, the Crash Command League. The winner's going to receive an unlimited box of Arcane Rising. I really want them to open up that Fabled. I really want them to open up anything from this set because it's that good. So if you're looking to crack packs, have a good time, draft, get Arcane Rising, dive straight in. This was all brought to you by Crash Command Games TCG Player. I did post up my Flesh and Blood cards onto there. Went through a couple of them pretty quickly, so I'm back down to just Welcome to Wraith stuff, because for some reason that stuff isn't selling right now. That's totally fine. I'm going to be restocking it again soon. Make sure to check that out. Check out the Discord that I'm going to put in the description of this or on the Patreon. Definitely, if you can, anything helps. It pays for all this equipment. It helps me buy more packs to give as prizes for all the events I'm going to be running. If we can get a good Discord community going that's out of state, out of town, I would definitely consider putting up a tabletop simulator or I don't like Talishar, but a Talishar event where we have prizes sent out. I don't know when I'm going to start doing companion videos to this podcast, but that is eventually coming down the pipe on top of like stupid Let's Plays, because in the server we have a couple games that I'm hosting out of a private server. Make sure to check all that out. Thanks again for chipping in, Deckheads. Cast A Commotion. This episode 0.